Hey Aditya, I just hit the custom live button, but it takes a couple seconds. Hello and welcome to February 18th wasmCloud community meeting. We've got just a few things to run through today. Short agenda, but I think still pretty cool stuff. First thing is Lucas is going to show some of the templates and examples he's been putting up in wasmCloud. Lucas, I should be able to share your screen.
And I was not. Try again. Oh yeah, now it works. All right. So today we're gonna be chatting a bit about the templates that we're putting together for wasmCloud v2 and some substantial differences in the scope of your project. So where before with Wash, everything was around developing a single component. Now the focus is a bit more on the full application. You have three components in the same application, no problem. You have a cargo workspace, no problem. So there are a few things here that will make life easier and sometimes might even feel like, oh, I thought it worked this way, but we're doing a bit of course correction. The other important part is about the feature set that wasmCloud v2 is bringing. Now we have the ability to bind TCP sockets and inside components. And when you do that, we are boxing that component localhost to just the components that you select. You can think of this like you're running two processes on your machine and you want them to communicate. If I bring in a third process, it will also see localhost because they are all on the same host. With wasmCloud v2, each workload has its own local host. So you can bind to the same port in multiple workloads and it will still work. And this TCP service example here is showing how to get that going. We have a very basic API here, and once we press send task, we just convert whatever text you sent here over to lead code. It just to kind of get that how that looks like when you're running it. You're gonna start wash dev either inside the directory or by passing the directory you want to run. Wash is gonna get through the compilation and bring up the HTTP server. At that point, you can write anything here. And when we press this button, what is actually happening is the HTTP component is opening a TCP connection to the sidecar component in the workload, sending the text that we have here, getting the response, reading the whole line, and presenting that back to us. And with this, we also see here the TCP connection reaching the workload service. And what this means is we have two components in this workload, and I'll show them here in a second. But one of those components is long running. So it has like a main function. It bounds to a TCP socket. It's listening in a loop. And we have another component, which is an HTTP, a WASI HTTP handler, which not is not in is not actually being executed until an HTTP request comes in, and that's when it gets exercised. So this allows us to create connection pools in WebAssembly and then use components that are stateless to communicate over this TCP connection that is long-lived in the other component. Now, might be a bit abstract talking about all of this, but I think talking a bit around the template here and how the code structure looks like might clear a few things up. The very first one is this is a Rust project, and where before we could only have one component per project, now you can have a regular cargo workspace where some of the code you have there, you might have multiple components, or you might have some components interleaved with your own binaries, your own crates, and inside your wash configuration, you specify which components you want to actually load from your workspace. As soon as you run wash new pointing to this template here, the very first thing that will happen is we're going to execute cargo fetch to get all the dependencies locally. And from that point on, when you run cargo build, oh, sorry, wash dev or wash build, we're going to be executing this build instruction here, telling the workspace to build everything for WASM32, WASI P2. Once we do that, we now tell the build here that the component path that was generated is this HTTP1 because that's the one we want to use um, as our entry point. And when you're running wash dev, we also tell it that this is the service, the long-running component that we want you to bring into this workload. So with this, the TCP listener can be its own crate, and using WSTD, it turns out to be pretty simple to get this going. The entire code for listening on a socket and replacing some strings can kind of fit in the screen if I do this, but then nobody can read. Uh, but just to say that WSTD already has support for sockets through TCP listeners, through TCP clients, and on the HTTP side, we have the component that serves HML, the UI, as well as a post request that will then send the TCP connection to the sibling component and, and pretty much send a line and receive a line. So this kind of shows, and this is a very basic example of how to use TCP here. But you can imagine in the future that you have any sort of connection bouncer, connection aggregator, be it PG Bouncer or any other database proxy. If you can compile that to WASM, you can load that in your workload and kind of bring your own PG Bouncer, if you will. Uh, so you get the properties of WebAssembly in terms of scale to zero and not having the components loaded in memory all the time, while still getting the connection pooling properties of your regular applications, like containerized applications from today. And I think that's kind of pretty much it here for the TCP service. If any questions, I can answer them. I'm not running it anymore.
Nice. Yeah. I'm also working on an example that I should get up later this week. But for that reason, I added a health check because I was constantly like taking it down, trying to get something else to compile. And yeah, that was my new like sanity check for myself. And that's been really nice to have. So I might add that to like all our examples because it's handy. But that was awesome. Thank you, Lucas. Um, and so any other questions, folks, for Lucas? Otherwise, we're going to move on to Doc of the Week. All right. Well, hey, Eric, you did some stuff with Excalidraw. I also played around with Excalidraw. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, and it can be a little bit of a conversation. This is a little less of a doc of the week and more of a documentation tooling of the week piece. So let's take a look here. So I've put up a PR for adding Excalidraw diagram tooling in wasmCloud.com. And the background here is as we're building out the wasmCloud v2 documentation, we've got a lot of places that we want to create diagrams, architecture diagrams, build pipelines, things like that. We want to really illustrate our docs richly. And historically, we've had kind of a wasmCloud project brand identity that we've associated with a sort of scratchy Excalidraw styling here. That's been our primary tool we've used. We have a common Excalidraw library for some graphical elements. So what we've been trying to figure out is how can we efficiently, effectively, and reproducibly leverage tooling like Claude Code to generate diagrams in a programmatic way that fit our project brand identity, and that generate diagrams that are pretty smooth and clear and accurate, and make this something that any contributor can do. So this is a little bit of work towards that effort, and I'd love if folks could check it out, see if it seems usable, see if you see any kind of issues with the workflow here. So in this PR, we're adding a Claude skill for Excalidraw diagrams into the .claude directory in the repo. And we're adding a couple of small scripts that help to export the Excalidraw files that Claude can generate into a crisp and clear PNG file, and that was a little bit of a challenge. So this is a custom script here that's helping us to do that. Along with those, we've got some information for Claude here in a claude.md file that helps Claude Code to more effectively generate the kind of things that we're looking for, and some documentation in the README for humans. So documentation for the diagram workflow, information on wasmCloud brand colors, instructions for editing existing diagrams, and in another PR I've got up that we may talk about next week, you'll see that there are Excalidraw files in there. We can talk about if that's a convention we want to use. But if that is, then this is how we can edit those diagrams. And then instructions for creating new diagrams with Claude Code, and either using automated export through Claude or manual exports through the tooling that we've included here. So would love some eyes on this PR, and open to any questions that folks might have right now about what we're doing here, how we might use this, other approaches you might want to take. It's definitely a let's get some feedback on this approach sort of initiative.
Any questions, folks? Well, I want to also call out that a lot of what's on our webpage today is art from Nick, and I also built out a library that uses a lot of what he put together. So if you have Excalidraw already open, and you click that link, that'll just add that library to your Excalidraw. I submitted it to the marketplace. I don't know if they'll ever merge that, looking at how long things have sat there. However, it's pretty easy to just click that and get some wasmCloud logos that are in Excalidraw form pretty easily. And then part of that is that it also will drop in. The main thing that I use out of that is it'll drop in a legend. So if I wanted, let me see if I've got it loaded locally. Yeah, here, I'll show you what it looks like. So this was completely generated. This diagram from Claude using the Excalidraw MCP skill. This is one that I hand made a little bit prettier, but still largely generated using our color scheme. But what's handy when you use the library, right? If I wanted to say, hey, this is host self-registration, let me add some wasmCloud branding to it. Bam, right? I can do something like that really easy. And that's from that Excalidraw library. But the one that I use the most probably is that I'll drop this in my area, and then I'll say, you know what, I can't, I don't like the background of this one, right? I wanna actually have some more contrast. And so I'll click the color, I'll click the little eyedropper, I'll click on space blue, and I'm realizing I changed the stroke and not the background, but bear with me. I'll change this to something lighter. Okay, let's make that Gainsborough, something like that. And so that's kind of easy and convenient way to do that when you're building out these diagrams. And we've got some of the other art that Nick had created. Or if you wanted to drop in, let's say, describing like a scaled out version of the host, all kinds of things. And if there's more that we want to add, just let me know. I'll throw it in there and we can share it. All right. Well, in terms of WASI P3, the work continues. I cut a new release candidate, rolled that into Wasm time, but we had significant changes to how WASI CLI worked that we got from implementation feedback. And the changes we made there meant that we actually needed to make more changes in Wasm tools and wit-bindgen to support basically changing the way that we did stood out, stood error, passing around that error message, and using it with futures, which uncovered a few bugs. And we have now, as far as I'm aware, fixed all of them. And for the most part, I've cut new versions of everything except for Wasm time. And so this will all land in the next release of Wasm time. Victor landed a massive PR for supporting streams and the second reference implementation for Jaco. And so next week, he's going to be taking on what he says is totally easier. So I totally believe him. But streams was the hard one, and implementing features should be a lot easier now that he's got streams. And so he'll be working on that next week. So we're looking pretty good. And I'm not currently aware of any more changes that we may want to make to those WASI APIs. So this current release candidate right now is what we're pointing at and is getting pretty close to being stable. So it's all very exciting. Next week, there's going to be the Bytecode Alliance Plumbers Summit. If you haven't heard about it, hear about it here. We're going to have 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, 3 hours each. The agenda, oh boy, y'all saw how many tabs I have. It's not a healthy amount. Something's wrong. But here is a link to it. I just got to it finally. Whew. This is sort of like our placeholder agenda. I'm should be getting this merged in an hour or so, something like that. Just getting a couple more confirmations from my speakers, but essentially, and I dropped this link over here. We're gonna have a keynote from Luke Wagner talking about our road to basically 1.0. We're gonna get an update on cooperative threads from Sai. We're gonna spend some time road mapping. We're gonna talk about guest languages. Joel Dice is gonna go through componentize Pi, componentize Go, componentize all the things, basically in all these languages. Victor Adossi, who y'all know is a wasmCloud maintainer, he's going to be talking about his work on Jaco, and then also our work that we're going to be taking on in the Bytecode Alliance to also support browsers with the component model. The second day is very much on the host side of the world. That's going to be focused on Wasm time, compile time built-ins, guest debugging in Wasm time, handling in Wasm time, which are all really freaking cool features, but they're going to go deep. And then and we'll have a couple different lightning talks. We've got somebody who's new to me, but has been a bit in the WebAssembly space. Yan Chen is going to talk about doing component virtualization and component fuzzing with components. So it's like component inception. It's one of our favorite things to do with WebAssembly. And then Till's also going to talk about how we're going to start writing really good specifications for WASI using a tool he created. And that's going to be, closing us out on the day. So lots of good content. And this is all leading up, obviously, to us getting our roadmap settled now that the work around WASI P3 is starting to settle down. Jeremy?
Yeah, so if I'm doing my time zone math correct, I think this is going to go into wasmCloud Wednesday, since this is Pacific time zone. So are we going to
I don't yes. We should maybe somebody can sign in here. We've never canceled, so I don't want to cancel.
All right.
But
Yep,
I think
that
somebody
works.
should sign in here and just be like, yo, you should listen to Victor, who's also a wasmCloud person, because it's going to be happening
I
at
like
the same
that.
time.
Yes, it's good.
I'll do that. I'll do that, Bailey. I'll take that. If somebody in the community wants to do that, more than happy to let someone else do MC rights. But I think everybody else should be paying attention to the content. I can absolutely do that in the background. Happy to.
Yeah, you know what's fun is I have all the Wasm time guys talking, and I did that over their Wasm time meeting, and they also let me know that today. So We are not the only community call that is getting interrupted, but it's for more community, broader community, meta community. I don't know. So hopefully you're able to attend. It's going to be on Zoom. I'll drop the link in wasmCloud Slack once we get a little bit closer next week, probably on Tuesday, and encourage and invite everybody to join and ask questions and listen in. And then, after all that, in March, the week before KeepCon, there's Wasm.io. Loads of awesome talks there. There's going to be some repeats. So if you want to see an early version of all those talks, come to the Bytecode Alliance Plumbers Summit. Then on after that, it's KeepCon, and we'll talk more as we accelerate into KeepCon. But that is it for the round of house community events. Any other topics or
So, Billy,
questions anybody have?
Billy, do you have anything in your schedule for the next month?
I don't know. It's all chill. It's so easy.
Hey, here's a question. Because we generally get there's a pretty long tail of people that watch these meetings. We've got 120 plus or so, I think, like really regular, consistent viewers. How can we help? I think that you guys as a team, you do an awesome job, Lucas, like putting stuff out on GitHub. Aditya, you've got, stuff, queued up. How else can we help, spread the word or, get things out there?
Is that a question for me? I don't know.
Yeah.
Clone me, maybe? No, I think follow along in Bytecode Alliance Zulip. We're pretty active there. There are plenty of to-dos and actions to be taken within wit-bindgen. There are amazing folks like Yordis, for example, who's part of our wasmCloud community, who just jumped in and implemented maps, which is like fairly hardcore to be like, you know what, I'm going to introduce something to the ABI, and then I'm going to roll that out everywhere, which is what he did. And that basically the process for that was coming up with a design that everybody agreed on in the component model repo. People are excited about it, but we're like, listen, we're not going to take that on right now. Like our target is WASI P3, obviously. And he's like, but it matters to me, so I'm going to go do it. And he got it done. And that's a good way to do it. I would say helping us expand out wit-bindgen is probably a big place where we need lifting. If you look at any of my PRs in the most recent wit-bindgen, they almost always involve me sneaking into C# or C++, or some of the others that are in more of an experimental state and being like, yeah, this also add this case to the list of cases that aren't handled today. And so it's pretty easy, and I've demoed it before, where you can work through that list, each one is a burn down, and get those cases working. So there's plenty of opportunity there. I think the biggest call to action that we're going to make is going to actually come from Victor, where we're going to be saying, listen, Chrome is basically evaluating whether or not they want to support the component model. We'll point to the issue where they're doing the evaluation. But a lot of that is dependent on whether or not the telemetry shows that it's worth it. And the telemetry they're going to be looking at is the shim that we produce as part of Jaco that people will build that will basically shim, aka polyfill, which is the word all the browser folks like to use, polyfilling component model support into the web. And essentially once they see a critical mass of folks that are dependent on that, they'll decide that it's probably worth it to bring it all the way into the browser. So getting people to actually use the shim is something that will help us get more resources long term, because then now we get a bunch of V8 devs that are working and building on this stuff.
Well, a lot going on. Lucas, I loved your demo, by the way. Like, I'm mind blown by that whole feature set. You and Bailey and Roman was working on that. Like, I think that is could be like wasmCloud's like little magic sauce. I think that's just amazing when you think about being able to sandbox TCP and constrain the side effects from leaking out into the host that you're operating on. That's just such a superpower. I can't wait to see how that evolves in the next few months as we continue to build that out.
All right. Well, looks like we're gonna end early unless anybody has anything they want to talk about. Hey, Aditya.
I wanted to talk about the wasi-config host plugin. From what I understand, it fetches the configuration at runtime because it's essentially the hash map from the host plugin that gets populated when we load the local resources from the K8 side from the initialization. What we were aiming to do was figure out a way to update those configurations mid-deployment. And one of the ways that we figured it out was to update the host API and add something along the lines of a workload update config a function, and basically adding a reconciliation condition for checking the config hash. I was wondering if there was a better way for the K8s to the wash runtime host communication, whether if it was possible to do it without modifying the host API, because we'd like to keep it as clean as we possibly can, and whether if that's something that we've planned for the roadmap, something like a dynamic config update flow.
Yeah, that's a good point because wasi-config in wasmCloud v1 was dynamic. So you could update values and they would pretty much reflect in the component once NATs reconciled. In wasmCloud v2, we looked at wasi-config and we also saw WASI CLI environment as kind of brothers from a different mother situation there. They're both just a hash map, and they are both trying to express configuration to the component. One is doing that in the scope of environment, like more like programs we're used today, and the other is doing the same thing, but in a more stateless environment. So you don't have a CLI environment available, therefore you use wasi-config, and those values can be modified elsewhere. For wasmCloud v2, we kind of started with let's get the values from both wasi-config and wasi CLI environment from the same place. So we pretty much mirror the values there. And exactly to start asking these questions, who is using these interfaces? Is there a preference for environment over configuration? Like, how is this being used today? And as you were talking about having to change these values, one idea that came here is keeping the CLI environment in the host API like it is today. And on the wasi-config side, we use NATs again. So we have the key value mapping to key values in NATs. This way you can update the value in NATs and it's reflected on the component. Because we don't want to change the host API exactly because it would introduce updates, it would break the idempotency that we have right now with workload deploys. So maybe getting wasi-config and figuring out how that would look like using a NATs connection is something interesting here that we can explore.
Yeah, I like that
definitely.
approach. Just to throw another one on the table, is that you can also virtualize the wasi-config API with your own. That is always there. And when I say virtualize in this scenario, you could do something even more akin to what WASI-virt does, where there isn't some extra export that is sitting on that component. You just basically wrap it with your own thing that you've bundled in. Like if you want a thing that totally statically and declaratively bundles in config and ship that with your component, you can do that. And that will be supported just straight out of the box. No wasmCloud host changes whatsoever. That's about how you build your component.
Yeah, I'll definitely take a look at WASI-virt, and especially about the WASI CLI environment. I believe that is statically linked with the WASI context just once, so you can't really change that. So yeah, our best bet was the WASI config change. Yeah, I think the NATs thing where we link it to a NATs schedule, I believe. Yeah, that's something I could take a deeper look into.
And then we have the story for local development where there's no nets. I think in that case, we use the same pattern as blob store key value. We use the file system and convert files into wasi-config key value maps.
Yeah, that's like a good addition for a developer experience. So yeah, maybe I can, if I get enough time, maybe I can contribute that to the whole ecosystem.
Awesome.
But yeah, thank you.
Any other topics or things folks want to bring up? Alrighty. Well, hope everybody has a good Wednesday, and hopefully I see you all next Wednesday in the